back to Licks of the Beast. I'm Nico and I am absolutely stoked about King Diamond's recent announcement of their upcoming North American tour, which is the first one in something like 5 years. I seriously cannot wait for this one, so it's the perfect time for me to dive into Andy Larocque's phenomenal guitar solo from what is arguably the band's most iconic song, Welcome Home. Andy Larocque is one of those guitar players that, like Michael Romeo and Chris Oliva, tend to be somewhat underappreciated. Many people who are fans of heavy metal guitar playing know who they are, they're familiar with their music, and some of it might even rank among their favorites. However, in my opinion, their incredible guitar work doesn't get celebrated quite often enough. So with this video, I'm going to take you through what it is about Andy's solo on Welcome Home that makes it so awesome and so highly memorable. Now, this is not going to be a step-by-step tutorial, but more of an analysis of the solo as well as an explanation of what is going on musically and technically. And for those of you who like having the tabs to follow along, you can download those directly from licksofthebeast.com/tabs. Welcome Home was the first single from the band's mesmerizing concept album, Them. It's actually an enthralling two-part story that continues on the follow-up album, Conspiracy. And I think it's a huge shame that there are still no concrete plans to turn it into a movie, because it could be so good. It's got all of the elements of a horror masterpiece. A haunted mansion, evil spirits and supernatural phenomena, descent into madness, murder, manipulation, betrayal. In the hands of the right people, it could turn out to be absolutely amazing. Andy Larocque has said that this is the solo that best represents his playing, because it blends speed with melody in a way that he's still happy with to this day. And considering this solo was recorded way back in 1988, I think that's pretty awesome. So Andy's solo comes at a really great spot in the song, just after it changes to double time feel, and it goes from this very dramatic mid-tempo scene setting pace to absolute chaos. This is one of those song within a song type of solos, where the lead guitar is playing over a standalone section not otherwise used in the song. So, as always, I want to start by looking at what the accompaniment is doing, because that is the foundation of the solo and what allows the melodic development to take place. So Andy's solo can be divided into two sections. The first one is in G sharp minor, and the chords are G sharp to E to G sharp to F sharp. The second section is in B minor, and at first, the chords follow the same root minor 6 progression. So B to G, then back to B. And then, instead of going to A, the 7th chord, like in the previous section, they change key again, this time to F minor. So why would you make such an odd key change in the middle of a guitar solo? Andy Larocque has said that King went pretty crazy with the progressive arrangements on this album. So was this just an attempt at being extra progressive? Well, actually no. In fact, this is a compositional technique known as a tritone modulation. So a change to a key that is 3 whole steps away from the one we were in. Now the reason one would do this in composition is to create tension and to sort of catch the listener by surprise. And in this case, the move is successful on both counts. Okay, now let's get to the actual solo. So every great solo needs that iconic opening lick. And the way Andy starts this solo is nothing short of impeccable. And he starts with this simple, melancholic melody. And then he flips that on its head with this creepy bit. Now, when I first heard that back in the day, I thought it was the coolest thing, and honestly, I still do. The contrast between the two parts is what really makes this lick. It starts with a very dreamy melody that is very consonant and almost soothing, and then goes into 3 back-to-back dissonant dyads. And to make things even more creepy, he bends the bottom note of the last dyad about 1.5 steps and then pulls up on the whammy bar at the same time. So he gets this screechy sound that is so creepy, it can make your hair stand on end. He follows that up with a fast legato run that brings an element of chaos. So that way things are moving from serene to creepy to chaotic. And it goes something like this. So here, he starts with a sweep-picked G-sharp minor triad, and then moves down the G-sharp minor scale before landing on two longer notes with a nice wide vibrato. So he lands on the E at the 14th fret, and then jumps up an octave to grab that E again at the 17th fret on the B string and bring it down a half step to D sharp. So this is all Aeolian mode, and that last part really highlights the Aeolian sound with that half step between the minor 6th and the 5th. Throughout the first two sections of the solo, Andy will continue to alternate between a melodic phrase and one that is faster with a more shreddy vibe. So this structure brings a good balance to the solo, and it's a good thing because on an emotional level, this one is anything but balanced. It's actually all over the place as you're taking along a very emotionally intense ride. In fact, the next melodic lick changes the mood yet again, this time to something more whimsical. So Andy is continuing in that higher octave, starting with a C-sharp minor arpeggio. Then sliding up to the minor 7th of that arpeggio, the note B. And now from there, it could go up to C sharp, but then it would feel too final. So Andy takes the better option, which is to descend to the B of the next octave. And this leaves you with a sense of anticipation. And that's because you're expecting the chord to change at this point. So that B, which is the minor third over the G sharp chord, feels somewhat unresolved. So you're getting a sense of harmonic tension even without there being any dissonance. And that last note creates a nice space as it sets up the next run, which is the fastest one of the solo and the one that I found the most challenging, as it's pretty much all alternate picking throughout, except for maybe two notes that he might be hammering on or pulling off to. So that's a pretty crazy run. Let me do that a little slower so you can get a better sense of it. With the volume on. Now some of you might have noticed that he's playing in an unusual position for something in G sharp minor. This is because the run is in F sharp mixolydian, which is basically the same set of notes only starting on F sharp. Now without getting into theory too much, both G sharp Aeolian and F sharp mixolydian are modes in the key of B major, so they contain the exact same notes. Now just a quick side note here, and I know I've said this before, but it really does bear repeating. When I analyze a song or a solo in this manner, I will describe certain things with musical terminology such as the names of the scales or modes, intervals, etc. Now that doesn't mean I think Andy Larocque was sitting there going, yeah, this part calls for the mixolydian mode, or I think I should go up a sixth and then down a third. That's definitely not the way most guitarists will work out a solo. The reason I choose to describe things in this manner is simply that I think music theory provides a neat and well-organized framework to categorize and communicate what is taking place in a given musical piece. So the idea is to explain why what we're hearing sounds good, rather than the thought process of the guitar player. And I know Andy has said many times that he doesn't really know much about music theory, but in my experience, when a player of that caliber says they don't know much about music theory, they usually mean they don't have a real academic knowledge of it. They do, however, have a very strong working knowledge of music basics and a ton of experience on how to use them just from the sheer amount of music they've studied while learning their instrument and from playing with other musicians for so many years. So Andy might not know what are all the modes in the key of B major, but he can definitely play over any chord progression in that key in a way that is musical, interesting, and creative. So that last run is really quite fast, and it requires technically precise alternate picking, with just the right amount of palm muting to keep it tight without it sounding choked. However, Andy still allows some noise to come through and a few notes to come out a bit slurred around the middle of the run before tightening up again at the end. Now this gives the run a bit more grit and makes it feel a little more alive and raw. I see a lot of players nowadays play these kind of runs very cleanly all the way through. And while I definitely appreciate the level of hand synchronization required to achieve that kind of clean precision, personally I prefer when it's a little less polished. Now, don't get me wrong here. By less polished, I don't mean sloppy. And playing a little more raw does not excuse poor skill because you still need to be technically sound to pull this off. But it's more like comparing something shot at 24 frames per second to 60 frames per second. There's a good reason why movies are shot at 24 FPS, because it feels more natural to us. For the second part of the solo, we see a key change to B minor. And this is where it starts to become more melodic and dreamy, especially with the inclusion of some harmonized guitar lines. So Andy starts this section with this motif, which is harmonized a third up like this. And he follows that with a descending B minor arpeggio that leads to another fast descending run, this time all legato. And I love when a run like that ends with an octave jump into a screaming high note. Now in this case, Andy goes up 2 octaves from the end of the descending run to that high F sharp, which he bends up 1.5 steps to A repeatedly. This is almost like applying a huge and very wild vibrato. After he releases for the last time, he slides over to the E at the 17th fret and moves down diatonically, accenting each note with the whammy bar to make it a little more spooky. Now comes the end of the solo with that tritone modulation to the key of F minor, as we mentioned earlier. Now here, Andy takes a rather unconventional approach with this descending melodic motif. Now, some of you who know your basic scales might have noticed that what he's playing doesn't really sound like F minor. And that's because it isn't. It's actually F mixolydian, which is basically a major scale with a minor 7th. Over the F to A flat chord progression, it creates a hauntingly uplifting feel. He also adds a harmony, mostly played a third higher, with a few notes a fourth up. So that's the whole solo. And I have to say, I really enjoyed putting this video together because it gave me a reason to take the time to finally learn this solo properly and really dive into it a little bit deeper. I also watched the music video a few times just to get in the right mood for it, and it really took me back like 35, 36 years. So I got to wallow in my nostalgia a little bit, which if I'm being honest, is a feeling I really don't mind at all. And I can't wait for the King Diamond show in November. And they're on tour with Overkill, which is just all kinds of awesome. Let me know if you're planning on going to one of the shows or if you've had the pleasure of seeing them live on a previous tour. I'm actually considering the possibility of catching this concert more than once, so if you see me there, don't hesitate to come say hi. It's always a huge pleasure to meet and chat with you guys. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and do stay tuned for more licks of the beast.